shortly, I hope, and then move into the 33rd chapter. Bill is probably sleeping. I don't know what time they got in this morning. They were supposed to have been in at 4, but I seriously doubt that. I didn't hear the plane come in, so I can't tell you what time. But anyway, have y'all given any thought to where you want to go after we finish up Deuteronomy? Because we'll finish it. If we don't finish, we'll finish it probably next week. Anybody got any suggestions or thoughts of where you want to go, or you going to let us pick? Okay, well, anyway, if you'll remember last week, we finished up the song of Moses, and Moses gave his final these final words regarding that, and we're going to pick up here with verse 48 and finish up this chapter when the Lord speaks to Moses and basically tells him to go up onto the mountain. So before we go any further, I'd like for Jeff, if you would, to lead our minds in prayer.
Almighty Father in heaven, we humbly bow before you. Thank you so much, Father, for another week and another day of life you've given us. Thank you, Father, for the many blessings that we have in our lives. Thank you for this church family. We thank you most of all for your blessed Son who died on the cross for our sins. We thank you now, Father, also for the opportunity to learn from the Word. We ask, Father, that you, Brother David, and all the teachers today, that they may have a recollection of things that they've studied, that they may present the lessons in a way that helps us to become better servants unto you. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
All right, so let's start with verse 48 and go through verse 52. It says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses that very same day, saying, Get thee up into this mountain Abram, unto Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab, that is over against Jericho, and behold the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel for a possession. And die in the mountain whither thou go up, and be gathered unto thy people, as Aaron thy brother died on Mount Hor, and was gathered unto his people. Because ye trespassed against me among the children of Israel at the waters of Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin, because ye sanctified me not in the midst of the children of Israel, ye shall see the land before thee, but thou shalt not go hither into the land which I gave the children of Israel." So the very same day that Moses finished up giving the song of Moses to the Israelites, God directed him to prepare basically for his death. And, at this time, Moses is about 120 years old, and he knew that his time was coming short. He knew that they were getting ready to go into the promised land, and he knew that he was not going to be able to follow the children of Israel into the promised land. Now, Mount Nebo is one of the peaks in the mountain range, and it stands a little east of Arabia, northeast of the Dead Sea. And generally, this mountain range runs pretty much north and south. So this was a good vantage point for Moses to go and view the land of the inheritance. Now, people in that culture in that time associated heights with nearness to their deities. They did a lot of worshiping up on mountains and things along that line. And I think it's, it was in God's plan that this happened, but there's kind of a symbolism there that he goes up and he's a little closer to God when he died. And we also notice that Aaron also, went up on a mountain when he died, and both were, they were buried on mountains in order to symbolize their nearness to God. Now, obviously, we don't know where exactly this happened. It's never been revealed in the Bible other than just a general area. And to my knowledge, nobody has ever found the grave of Moses, unlike some of the other landmarks in the Bible that can be identified even to this day. So God is going to permit Moses to go up on the mountain, and he's going to see the land. And the language in the original text kind of indicates that he's going to be able to view the entire land and get a picture of all of it that he's going to be able to see, and not just not a small portion of it. Even though he's not going to be able to enter into the land himself. Of course, we remember that the Lord had told Moses to speak to the rock, and he kind of deviated from it and he struck the rock, and that was the sin that kept Moses from going into the promised land, because there he disrespected God at that particular time. And he betrayed not only anger and disobedience, but he reflected on God whom he'd served, implying that God could not bring forth the water without that rock being struck. And of course that was unpleasing to God, and Moses paid the initial price there at the end for not being allowed to enter into the promised land. So he's given the children of Israel a warning in the Song of Moses. He's getting ready to go up onto the mountain and fulfill the will of God, but he's going to get to see the promised land. So, any comments or questions about that particular chapter? Okay, let's move on then to the next chapter. Okay, so this is the next to last chapter in Deuteronomy. And before ascending up to Mount Nebo to take a view of the land which he was not permitted to enter in, of course, and then to die, Moses here is kind of taking a farewell and giving a testimonial to the children of Israel. And this has kind of got to be a bittersweet moment for Moses, because for years he has led the children of Israel, and he's been the one that they look to, and now he's passed the reins to Joshua, and this is kind of his last testament to the children of Israel, and it's a blessing that he is giving to each of the different tribes. And of all indications, this was also done the same day that Moses was told to go up to the mountains. Even though the record doesn't specifically say that, it would be logical that would be the things that happened. So in the Song of Moses, Moses dwells chiefly on the calamities that were going to befall the people because of their disobedience to God. But in this blessing, he's going to show them the benefits of having the divine favor and what that divine favor is going to do for the children of Israel. Now, the tone is somber, but there's also a comforting part of it also that kind of cheer up the children of Israel and make it a little bit more serene. And you got to think about it. Not only was this a bittersweet moment for Moses, but it was also a bittersweet moment for the children of Israel, because he's the only leader that these people have ever known. And even though generations have passed since, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and the original group that had left Egypt, there was only a couple of them left. And this was a dark period, and probably a time when there was some apprehension on the children of Israel. So Moses is going to take the benefit of this occasion to give them a final benediction of the things that they need to remember. Now, obviously, Moses cared about the welfare. If he hadn't cared about their welfare, he wouldn't have gone to all the problems composing that song that warned them of all the things that could happen if they went away from God, and to show them and encourage them that if they continue in God's way, that there's going to be a blessingness, and by doing this, their posterity and is going to be a happy and secured one. Now, the blessing here consists basically of is a benediction. There's an introduction, there's the blessing, and then there's the conclusion. So after receiving this announcement of his death, and as one of the final official acts as Israel's leader, he pronounces a prophetic blessing on the tribes of Israel. And this is not unlike the blessing that Isaac gave and the blessing that that Jacob gave. And this was kind of a traditional thing in the Near East at that particular time. And in the Near East, a dying father's final blessing was spoken to his sons and his daughters, for that matter. And it was kind of an irrevocable legal testament, and it kind of like a will that we would talk about today. And it was accepted in court if there was a dispute among the estates. So even though the testament wasn't written down with the witnesses and all that type of thing, it would even stand up in court. Of course, that's not what we're talking about here. But in that culture, that was a thing that was done here. So in the case of the biblical patriarchs, the authority and the potency of their last blessings, kind of inspired the prophecies that they had, and it was spoken in a testimonial type of form. So I'm sure that that the Spirit of God also moved Moses a little bit in this situation as he pronounced these blessings, because some of this is basically more prophecy of the things that are going to happen. Now, the last thing I want to kind of mention here is there's a lot of the scholars that feel like that this chapter and the next chapter was not written by Moses. And the reason, because this appears to be written in third person, like somebody else is telling the story. So, if Moses wrote it, that's great. If Moses didn't wrote it, it's still scripture, and it's still inspired by God. And whoever wrote it was obviously an eyewitness to the things that Moses had said in this chapter. Any comments? So let's move to look at verse 1. It says, "And this is the blessing with Moses, the man of God, blessed the sons of Israel before his death." Now we see here that Moses is called the man of God, and he's being raised up of God, and he's eminently qualified to speak about the things that he is getting ready to talk about. And obviously there's some inspiration of God here that are being expressed. And he blessed Israel by a spirit of prophecy, and which he did a little before his death, and when it was very near. And as the writer says, it was the very day of his death. Now, scholars regard verses 2 through 5 as among some of the most obscure in the entire Hebrew Bible, and it can be interpreted several different ways. And it's interesting to read how some of the different scholars have interpreted this, but they all kind of come to the same conclusion at the end of the discussion. So let's look at verse 2. It says, "And he said, Jehovah came from Sinai and rose up from Seir to them. He shone forth from Mount Paran, and he came with 10,000 of saints. From his right went a fury law for them." So Moses was an eye and ear witness of the things that he's talking about here. And he begins his blessing first looking at who was giving the blessing. And he begins this blessing with God, and he ends this blessing with God, because God is the one who is going to be given all the blessings. Now, if you look at this from kind of a geographic situation, Mount Seir and Mount Paran were two mountains with some little distance from Mount Sinai. And it's probable that when the Lord came down upon Sinai, the reflection of the glory shined also on these other two mountains. It was a very radiant glow when God came down, and it glowed and shined the space between the two mountains. So Jehovah came from Sinai, from Sur, and from the mountains of Paran. Did not refer to different manifestations of God, but to this one appearance at Sinai. So it all kind of works together. And like the sun rises and fills the whole horizon with its beams, it's the same kind of thing with the Lord. When He appeared, His manifestation was not confined to a single point, but it shone all over the mountains, and it reflected all the way around to these other points, even to the point where the children of Israel were covered by the glory of God here. So the Lord appeared to the people from the summit of Sinai as they laid encamped at the foot of the mountain. We talked about that earlier in the book. And this appearance kind of rose like a streaming light, and it shone, all the way across this mountain range. Now, Sur is the mountain land of the Edomites to the east of Sinai, and the mountains of Paran are, in all probability, not the mountains of Etah, which forms the southern boundary of the desert of Paran, but rather the mountain of Azimrah, which ascend to a great height above Kadesh and forms the boundary wall of Canaan toward the south. I tried to find a map of all of this stuff, and I really couldn't find a decent map that kind of showed all this. I would have projected it on the screen, but if you look at you can see the mountain range on some of the maps that are there, but some of these particular points that are discussed here are not clearly brought out. So the glory of the Lord appeared there at Sinai and went to the east and to the north extreme of the desert. So this manifestation of God formed the basis for all the subsequent manifestations of His grace and His omnipotence, and that was the point for the salvation of all of His people. Now in verse 2, it talks here about holy ones. Most of the scholars seems to think that what he's referring to is angels in this particular thing. So Moses described God as accompanied by His countless angelic servants while He revealed His law to Israel there at the Sinai. And of course, we know that the law came from the burning bush, which we've talked about before. Comments about that verse. Okay, let's look at verses 3 through 5. He loved the people. All His saints are in your hand, and they sat down at your feet. Everyone shall receive your words. Moses commanded us a law, inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. And he was king in Jeshurun when the heads of the people and the tribes of Israel were gathered. So God, like Moses, loved his people. And the Israelites were here under the protection of God. And of course, their leader was Moses. And God revealed His plan through Moses, and Moses gave the law that God had revealed to him. But their king wasn't Moses. Their king was God. He was the king of the people at that time. And the arrangement of the tribes that they have in this blessing that we're getting ready to do is a little unusual compared to the way that the tribes are listed in other parts of the Bible. Now, there's lists of tribes that appear in Genesis, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua. And each of these contain kind of a different order of how the different tribes were put together. And it appears that God based this list on a combination of past and future histories of each tribe. So what we're going to see here in the next few verses is a revelation that Moses gives, but this revelation pretty much actually comes from actually comes from God, and it's revealed. It's revealed to Moses from God. Comments about through verse 5. All right, let's start with verse 6. It said, "Let Reuben live and not die, and let not his men be few." So Reuben, here in verse 6, was the firstborn, but he did not enjoy the greatness among the tribes because of his sin. He lost his father's birthright and blessing. And furthermore, no great civil or military leader or prophet ever came from this particular tribe, as far as the scriptures record. And through his life and his blessings have been forfeited by his transgression with his father's concubine. And we can read about this in Genesis 49, verses 3 and 4. And in his rebellion with Korah, we can read about that in Numbers 16, 1 through 3. And the point is here, he's not going to become extinct in the tribe of Israel. He's going to continue to exist, but there's not a whole lot of things that are going to come from the tribe of Reuben. Comments about that verse. Let's go on to verse 7. "And this for Judah, and he said, Hear Jehovah, the voice of Judah, and bring him to his people. Let his hands be sufficient for him, and ye shall be a help to him from his enemies." Now Judah here received the position kind of as the leader among the tribes when his older brothers became ineligible. And this he spake of Judah. The Lord hears the voice of Judah. And it says in one of the Tegums to receive his prayer when he goes out to battle, and let him be brought back in safety to his own people. And I think one of the things that we have to kind of keep in mind is that there was a lot of battles that were fought in obtaining the promised land. And, the blessing of God was very important to the children of Israel, so that they were able to go out and fight these battles and bring their people back safely, because they were outnumbered pretty much in every battle that they ever fought in these things. So his hands will be sufficient, and he's going to have the sufficiency of warriors to always support the tribe. In other words, there's always going to be enough men to fight the battles and to vindicate the right things that God will have them to do. And their enemies are never going to prevail against the tribe of Judah. But there's a part to that. We've got to remember, that's as long as they follow the things of God. These blessings are all dependent on the children of Israel following the things of God. So there's basically three things that are expressed here: that the tribe of Judah, conscious of its weakness, shall depend on God and make prayer and supplications to him for these things to happen. Second, that God will hear such prayer. And third, that his hands shall be increased, and that he shall prevail over his enemies. So we see here that there is something for Judah to do. They are to pray to God. They are to keep God in the forehand. God will hear the prayer, and God will supply the increase and the things necessary to prevail over the enemies of Judah. Comments about that verse. All right, let's look at verse 8. And of Levi he said, Let your Tirim and your Urim be with your Holy One, whom you proved at Massah. You strove with him at the waters of strife, who said to his father and to his mother, I have not seen him, and he has not acknowledged his brothers nor his own son, for they have observed your word and kept your covenant. Let them teach Jacob your judgments and Israel your laws. Let them put incense before you and whole burnt sacrifice on your altar. O Jehovah, bless his strength and accept the work of his hands. Strike through the loins of those who rise against him and of those who hate him, that they should not raise again. So this Urim and Thummim were those stones we talked about that were in the breastplate of the priest's breastplate, in the pocket of the breastplate. Now the Urim usually means guilty, and the Thummim usually means innocent. And this would imply that the purpose of those were to deal and confirm or refute either guilt or innocence. And we talked about this before. They would kind of reach in their pocket and they would pull one out. So this indicates that one of the important things that the Levites were going to be doing is they were going to be judging. And the specific act of faithfulness to God that resulted in Levi being chosen as the priestly tribe kind of occurs a little bit later. And that the event was Levi standing with Moses and Aaron when the rest of the nation rebelled and worshipped the golden calf at Sinai. But Levi stood with Moses and Aaron in this situation. Now, it's kind of interesting to look about this phrase here, godly man. Some scholars seem to think that in the text it refers to Levi rather than Aaron, and there's other ones that kind of feel like that it talks about Aaron. The way I read it, it's talking about Levi in this case, and you can disagree because I'm not going to argue with you one way or another, because it's really I've read it 3 or 4 times. It's really not clear, and we haven't really seen it in the original language. But the Levites' special privileges and responsibility included teaching the rest of the Israelites the law. And the priests, of course, burned incense before God. They did the sacrifices, and they also discerned the will of God, and they judged situations, not only civil situations, but they also judged in matters of religion also. So, they're laying out here the things that the Levite is doing. Now, the shattering the loins in verse 11 probably refers to the making one incapable of producing offspring, as well as destroying one's strength. Now, therefore, Aaron was called God's Holy One, and more especially, he was a type of most holy one, because he was the one who went into the Holy of Holies, and he was the very first priest, through them going through the wilderness. Now the other part here talks about God's letting these priests be when they do their judgment, they're not respecter of persons. They don't give special privilege to their parents. They don't give special privilege to their siblings, but they're a fair and objective observer, and they keep the covenant, and they're doing the things that God wants them to do, and they're righteous judges because of the way that they handle themselves. Comments about those verses? All right, let's move on to verse 12. Of Benjamin he said, the beloved of Jehovah shall live in safety beside him, and shall cover him all the day long. Yea, he shall dwell between his shoulders. Now, Benjamin here in verse 12 was going to enjoy God's protection continually, since God would carry this tribe basically on his back or between his shoulders, as it says here. Now, the tribe of Benjamin, as some of the ancient writings say, was taken notice of next to Levi, because as the priesthood was the tribe of Levi, the temple where the priests officiated was going to be built in the area of the tribe of Benjamin, or somewhere, in that area. And it's observed that the only one that was ahead of that was Judah. So Moses is kind of putting these tribes in an order as far as providence here. And it was actually before his elder brother Joseph's tribe, and it kind of lays between Judah and Joseph. And Joshua, talks about this a little bit in Joshua 18 and verse 11. So, when we look at these, the Levites had no inheritance. They had some cities of refuge, but they had no inherited land in this situation. And Benjamin was a tribe of warriors, and they enjoyed God's protection. And it would be very fitting where Levi, who had no inheritance, would put the temple in a place where it would be protected. And the tribe of Benjamin was a very good place to do it. So the tribe of Benjamin, they were going to dwell in safety. The Lord was going to give them a dwelling place where it would be safe. And basically part of it was ended up being Jerusalem, where was in the area of the tribe of Benjamin. Comments about those verses, or that verse? Okay. I'm sorry.
I had written down, Paul was from the tribe of Benjamin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right, so let's look at verse 13. And of Joseph he said, "Blessed of Jehovah be his land with the precious things of heaven, for the dew and for the deep that crouches beneath, and for the precious fruits of the sun, and with the best yield of the months, and with the first of the ancient mountains, and for the precious things of the everlasting hills, and for the precious things of the earth and fullness of it, and for the goodwill of him who liveth in Bush. Let the blessings come on the head of Joseph, for on the top of his head of him who was separated from his brothers, his glory is like the firstborn of his bull, and his horns are like the horns of a wild ox. With them he shall push the people together to the ends of the earth, and they are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are thousands of Manasseh. So basically, Joseph was the firstborn of Rachel, and he represented Ephraim and Manasseh. And Joseph arrived, or what Joseph desired and solicited for his son Joseph, Moses desires also for the tribe named after him, and to give them the greatest possible abundance of the earthly blessings and a vigorous manifestation of power in a conflict with nations. He wanted a powerful group here, but unmistakably may the connection between these words and the blessings of Jacob, not only in the things desired, but even in the particular expression, there was an important difference which equally strikes us, namely that in the case of Jacob, the main point of the blessing is the growth of Joseph into a powerful tribe, whereas with Moses, it was development of power on the part of the tribe in the land of inheritance. But it's in harmony with each other at different times. Now, Jacob describes the growth of Joseph under the figure of a luxurious branch of a fruit tree by the water. And Moses kind of fixes his eyes primarily upon the land and desires for him the richest production of the land. So, Jacob kind of had him under a shade tree, and Moses has got him out there doing some work. It's kind of how the thing there works. Now, this phrase here, the firstborn of his ox in verse 17, probably refers to Joseph as the most powerful of the powerful. And he was the firstborn son of Jacob, like we said, by Rachel. And Ephraim was the stronger of Joseph's sons, who was both strong as the horns of a wild oxen, and during the tribe's conflict with the Israelites, they were good. Or the Ephraim section of it were really good warriors. So God has, and Moses, he's expecting great things of the tribe of Joseph there. Comments about those verses? All right, let's look at verse 18 and 19. And Zebulun said, Rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out, and Issachar in your tents. They shall call the peoples to the mountains. There they shall offer sacrifices of righteousness, for they shall suck the bounty of the seas and the treasures hidden in the sand. This is a very interesting section here, talking about Zebulun and Issachar. And they would become special channels of blessing to the nations by means of their commercial wealth. And they would draw on the abundance of the sea, and they would draw on the hidden treasures that were in the land or on the ground, talking about the sand here. And their inherited territory also included the very fertile Jezreel Valley. Now, Zebulun talks about here about in thy going out, and that is he was very prosperous in his coastal voyages, and the tribe's situation was very favorable, and they were very successful. And in his area, there was a lot of very successful seaports. So he got he was a man of the sea. He was a good man of commerce. And because of the things that he did, all of the tribes benefited from the things that Zebulun does. On the other side, we see here, we talk about Issachar and the tents. And that is, he is going to be prosperous in agriculture and pastures and things along that line. And, really, there's not a whole lot more written about this actually taking place in Bible time, but fulfillment through history has proved that this prophecy that Moses made here has really worked. And even today, there's our major ports for Israel in these areas. Now, it also mentions here about traffic with the Gentiles, and it talks about drawing people to the mountain. And this is kind of an interesting part of the deal. But not only were they drawing on the abundance of the sea, but they were also, because of the things that they did, they were drawing the heathen to the mountain and showing them righteousness. Now, what the reference here in my mind has got to be, it's talking about, bringing them to the temple in Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was, the temple was built on a mountain. And the things that these tribes would do were going to bring people in their posterity, and in later years we're going to draw people into the righteousness of God. Now, it also talks about here about, we'll pick up here next week, because I want to talk a little bit more about the parts of the sand. So we'll pick up here next week. Appreciate everybody's attention and comments today.